It's just wonderful to see so many young people. They were there at the first meeting on the morality of the Constitution. And how we planned it today is that the speakers are going to basically spark off a conversation. So 10 minutes to 12 minutes, 15 minutes between the audience and the speakers. So I'm just a timekeeper for the moment. But I'll start with one small comment. Secularism has been declared and dismissed as a colonial concept, as a Western concept not applicable to India. Because India is supposedly very religious. Now, I'm not denying India is religious, but there is a difference between religion as faith and religion as politics. And we have to make that distinction. Hinduism is faith, Hindutva is politics. I wonder if any proponent or defendant of Hindutva has really very much knowledge about Hinduism. In fact, I think Jawaharlal Nehru wrote more about Hinduism than any of the present leadership. But every concept, we also have to remember, has its own distinctive historical trajectory. In the West, secularism arose as a result of the privatization of religion or the absence of religion in the public sphere. It was a product of the Enlightenment. It was also the product of the 30 Years' Wars, where people, you don't know the story of Henry VIII, where repeatedly he got his wife's heads cut off and finally broke off from the Church of Rome, and led to, over time, a massive civil war between the Catholic Church and the new Church of England. So religion, they all agreed, should be privatized. It should be a part of your faith, your conversations with God. But in the public sphere, and they were not aware of something called multiculturalism, because in the 18th and 19th century, basically European theory was by European men for European men. They didn't have very little knowledge of multiculturalism. In the public sphere, there would be no reference to religion, although must remember that the head of the state in England is also the head of the church. But these do not preempt the fact that there was a split between the public and the private when it came to secularism. In India, on the other hand, secularism emerges as a way of negotiating the politicization of religion, which started at the turn of the 20th century. By the 1920s, things had come to such a pass that India was racked by communal riots. Each group wanting a state of its own, each group demanding a monopoly over political power. At that time, in 1928, when the All Parties Conference started to draft a constitution under the chairpersonship of Motilal Nehru, they did not mention secularism, but they did talk about the rights of minorities to their own culture, and this became a part of the Constitution of India. The Constitution of India actually doesn't mention secularism, it came much later. In 1931, after terrible, terrible riots that occurred in Kanpur, the Indian National Congress, I wrote quite a very interesting piece on communalism, and Gandhi declared that the state will be neutral between religions. So secularism was more or less undefined. Nobody really knew, but it permeated the discussions of the Constituent Assembly and came up in many different contexts. But there was no definition of secularism. Till Nehru, writing the introduction for a book called Dharam Nirpekshata, said very specifically, secularism means three things. It means freedom for all religion. It means equality of all religions, and it means the state shall be neutral. The former two can be, of course, covered by fundamental rights. You don't have to declare secularism, but neutrality of the state is an intrinsic part of secularism. Thereof, the conversation on secularism was monopolized by the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court proceeded to define secularism in the Bomai case after the Babri Masjid demolition as Dharam Dharam Dambhav. Now, Bhikkhu Parekh, and this is the last point I'm going to make, Bhikkhu Parekh had made a very interesting comment. He said, Sarv Dharam Sambhav is a Hindu concept. All religions are equal, all visions are equal, or all faiths are equal. It is not the concept of Islam or Christianity, but it does not obey any other Lord, the God besides thee. I mean, first commandment of the 10 Commandments we all learned in the convents. Thou shalt not obey any other God besides me. Buddhists and Jains don't even have a God. So why are we imposing a Hinduized conception of secularism on the country as Param Dharam Sambhram? My own idea is that it's time to secularize secularism and to ground it in Article 14, that is equality. I invite Zoya, will you start? If you're comfortable. Yeah. Professor Zoya Hasan, an old friend, very distinguished political scientist, who actually made political science go international.
Friends, it's wonderful to participate in this panel, and many thanks to the Center for Equity Studies and the International Center for organizing this panel on secularism, and to Mander for asking me to speak in the panel. As Neera just said, I'm a student of Indian politics, of political processes, state, parties, and majoritarianism. So I will approach the challenges facing secularism in the context of broader trends in Indian politics and the impact of majoritarianism in particular. Now, secularism can mean many different things, but one thing is clear, that Indian secularism moves away from the standard church-state models of secularism and begins to focus instead on secularism as a response to deep religious diversity in our society, and that diversity must be understood as enmeshed in power relations, and therefore the hidden potential of religion-related domination must be explicitly acknowledged. As a concept, secularism consists of two major principles. The first is that people belonging to all faiths and sections are absolutely equal before the Constitution, the law, and the state. This has not been fully implemented under any regime, but it is an important principle. Second, it is imperative to separate religion from electoral politics, which is to say that religion shall not be inducted into politics and that it shall not be exploited for political gain. This too is sadly not implemented, but ultimately it was this sentiment, with this sentiment in mind, that the Representation of People's Act, RPA, through Section 123, Section 3, outlawed the appeal for votes by any candidate contesting in an election on grounds, among others, of religion, and that would be declared a corrupt practice. The misuse of religion for political ends would be a violation of, as I just said, Section 123 of the RPA. And under this election law, the onus of preserving the sanctity and purity of the election process lies not just with the candidate contesting the election, but her agent, the manifesto on which she contests, in short, with the political party that puts up the candidate. However, as we know, political parties have found the idea of using religious and communal appeals for making electoral gains too tempting to give up. Almost all political parties are, in one way or the other, guilty of using religion-related issues for political gains. A series of statements by political leaders designed to aggravate communal passions in different parts of the country, especially in poll-bound states, and we saw that so recently in the just concluded assembly elections. So a series of statements by political leaders designed to aggravate communal passions in different parts of the country constitutes the centerpiece of this strategy, which polarizes the political atmosphere. The Supreme Court, in a landmark ruling in the Abhiram Singh versus C.D. Komachan in 2017, banned political candidates from seeking election on the basis of religion, caste, or language. The ruling states that an election won by soliciting votes along lines of identity politics could be considered corrupt. But of course, this ruling has not deterred politicians. Nevertheless, I would argue it constitutes an important constitutional template to prevent parties from making crude appeals to religion for electoral gains. But alas, the failure to keep creed out of politics has been one of the crucial fault lines of our democracy. Since a wall of separation is not possible under Indian conditions, the challenge is to develop and implement a formula for equidistance and minimum involvement of religion in politics. Far from moving towards minimum involvement of religion, we have moved towards greater involvement of religion. Secularism has been challenged and contested by the strategies and actions of those in power that prefer to disregard the diversity and the beautiful pluralism of our society as relics of the past and to affirm instead a majoritarian idea of India as a Hindu nation. The larger ideological agenda is denying India's heterogeneity, which has been historically and I would say even contemporarily its greatest strength. It is complete homogeneity that is valued, which is one nation, one religion, one culture, and of course now even one election. The attempt is to shift from unity in diversity to unity in oneness. But today, the crisis of secularism has gone beyond political calculations and pragmatic communalism of parties in the past to an ideologically driven approach that has penetrated state institutions. Two recent examples illustrate this apropos the two principles that I mentioned in the beginning. One is the Election Commission's repeated failure to implement the Model Code of Conduct with regard to religious appeals, and the Supreme Court allowing access to Hindu worshippers in the Gyanvapi Mosque in Varanasi that has all but put the Place of the Worship Act of 1991 in cold storage. Both are signs of creeping majoritarianism within state institutions, which is prevailing much to the detriment of the idea of neutrality. What can then be done? I would argue that two crucial moves can retrieve the discourse of secularism. There must be appropriate limits of governmental accommodation of religious belief and practice within a pluralistic democracy. The state must show critical respect of all religious and philosophical worldviews, and this is possible only when it adopts a policy of what political theorist Rajiv Bhargava calls principled distance towards all of them. Failure to do this results in the dilution of secularism and an abridgment and attenuation of democracy itself. Hence, we must oppose every move, every action that promotes majoritarianism, if I may say so, tyrannical majoritarianism. This requires us to recognize the essential connection between secularism and democracy. And this is really my central point, that the two, that is democracy and secularism, are inseparable. It is difficult to sustain democracy without secularism. A definitive pronouncement, as Neera pointed out in her introductory remarks, a definitive pronouncement pertaining to it was made by the Supreme Court in the S.R. Bommai case, and that bears reiteration. This is the assertion of the centrality of secularism in the constitutional scheme, and that it is an element of the basic structure of the Constitution. That's the point I want to underline, that secularism is in the constitutional scheme is an element of the basic structure of the Constitution. It cannot be amended, and that no religion will be at risk in secular India because government should simply not be aligned to any religion. Secondly, effective measures have to be taken to eliminate discrimination on grounds of religion and caste, and we know there's plenty of that, in the exercise and enjoyment of human rights and fundamental freedoms in all fields of civil, economic, political, social, and cultural life. The ubiquitous presence of stark inequalities in our society today continues to pose a huge challenge to the construction of an inclusive society visualized by the Constitution. But, and I want to conclude on a positive note, despite its many failings and the many failings of secularism, it is not easy to dislodge it completely. It is not easy to dislodge the broader historical pattern of pluralism in our society, though it has become more difficult today because it is the state that is dislodging secularism and not society, really speaking, alone. But it is important, nevertheless, to reassert the validity of the secular credo as the only legitimate ground for a diverse and democratic society. The challenge today is to reiterate and rejuvenate secularism's basic principles. Freedom, equality, and equality has to be substantive, not just formal. That is, it has to be substantive in the political and economic sense, and we must adhere in word and deed to the Constitution and ensure that citizenship, irrespective of caste or creed or ideological affiliation, is the sole determinant of Indianness. Thank you.
Well, this was a salutary and a brilliant reminder of the obstacles that face the reinstation of secularism as a central principle of state policy. I just have one small comment to make. Zoya took us through this, the steps by which secularism was dislodged, and it's not only political parties, it's also the Supreme Court, it is also individual justices of high courts, it's also the police, which are behaving in reprehensible fashion. The one point I would suggest is that when the 90s all of us started writing on secularism, perhaps the concept was too overburdened. And we connected it very deeply with the Shabanu case. Now, secularism is not about relationship within communities or gender equality. That is the task of democracy. Secularism is about equality between religious communities, and to burden it with the task of enforcing gender equality, which invariably comes up every time. So what about personal laws, or what about uniform civil code? That is not the job of secularism. Secularism is a principle which is a cousin concept of democracy. It applies the principles of democracy, particularly equality, to the relationship between communities and the relationship of the state to religious communities. Let us not burden it with the gender equality or caste equality. That would be stretching it out of shape. We need to unburden secularism a little, and we need to burden democracy more. I mean, that is my suggestion, and that is my belief, because I think a lot of confusion has been created after the Shabanu case about the relationship of women within communities. That's not the job of secularism, that's the job of democracy. Okay, may I now invite Mander to make his comments?
Friends, I don't think there could be a more important time than this to have this discussion.
You next, please. And Apoorvanand.
There were many streams in our freedom struggle. They differed in terms of the means of struggle. There was non-violent struggle led by Mahatma Gandhi. There were radical left streams in the struggle, best symbolized by Bhagat Singh. There was the Indian National Army of Subhash Chandra Bose. There was Dr. Ambedkar, whose central stress was on radical equality. But if there was one thing that all of them agreed upon, they differed on means, but they agreed on the India that we would build when we would be free. And that idea was that India would be a country where people of various religious identities and specifically Muslims because of the whole history of partition. Uh, all people of all religious identities would have equal rights in every way as equal citizens. It would not matter which God you worship, or if you worship no God. It would not matter what language you spoke, what your caste, your gender, your identity, your wealth. In every respect, you would be an equal citizen in every way. And I think, in very this idea is what I would call the idea of secular democracy. And I agree very much with Zoya that these are, the ideas of secularism and the idea of democracy are inextricably tied together in a country that has such high, vast religious diversity. This idea is, as I said, is central to what we describe as secular democracy. One can argue that this idea is in fact at the soul of the Indian Constitution. It is also the foundational idea of the free Indian nation. And as Zoya said so, and Neera, this is not an idea simply imported from the West. Instead, I believe it incorporates a distillation of what is best in India's own civilizational traditions. The India of Buddha, Kabir, Nanak, of the Sufi and Bhakti saints, of Ambedkar and Gandhi. India's idea of secularism incorporates within it ideas of religious freedom and its limits, the place of and the relationship of religion in and with the state. But also, and I wanted to underline that in my presentation, it also bears very strongly on the notions of citizenship and belonging. Who belongs, who does not belong, and who belongs on what terms in this vast, diverse country. And this idea of equal belonging, what I would describe for me, secularism first of all guarantees equal belonging to all with no conditionalities. You don't have to, I was in Germany for many months, and it's a country which is quite remarkably has tried to deal with its legacy of the Holocaust and all that happened. But with all of it, it still retains the idea that if people are coming from outside, if they want to belong to this country, they must learn the German language, they must respect the German culture, religion, way of life. And I realized how important our notion at its best was. And that notion is truly that this is a country we would build where you would be free to be yourself, to worship in the way that you choose or not choose, speak the language, dress, eat, sing, and because of sexual minorities and so-called honor killings, love, in the way that you choose. No conditionalities. Each of you will belong equally to this country. That is, to my mind, at the heart of the secular idea. I was fortunate to spend my early childhood in Arunachal Pradesh, which was MIFA. My father was an administrator there, and I used to see there communities where just 200 people in the whole world who speak a certain language and have a certain way of life. And for me, the beautiful idea of India is that those 200 people belong equally with their language and with their way of life. And they belong to this country without. So I would say for me, secularism is first the idea of equal belonging without conditionalities of any kind of deference to the majority religion, culture, and way of life. But having said that, this belonging without conditionalities is, and I will contradict myself, is not without limits. Just that the limits are not imposed by the majority religion or culture. It is, like in Germany, 25% of Germany is now of immigrant populations, and much of them are of Muslim identity. If I would say, is Islam part of German culture, people would actually fall off their chairs in sort of consternation. our idea was, yes, the 200 people in Arunachal Pradesh following their way of life are part of Indian culture. Islam, Christianity, the various, Buddhism, Sikhism, all its various diversities are part of our freedom, are part of our national identity. But there are limits. The limits are not of majoritarianism, the majoritarian culture and religion and values. The limits are set by the Constitution and its morality. And that's why I'm happy that we started our first discussion about what is constitutional morality. I recall, a very beautiful judgment by the Delhi High Court, Justice A.P. Shah and Justice Muralidhar, on the question of the, Section 370. And it was an interesting moment because people of every religious identity which was represented, and largely by men, all of them were united. I've never seen them united on anything else except that homosexuality is against our religion and culture. And what the two judges said is that you have the freedom in this country to follow your personal beliefs, but those personal beliefs are subordinate to the higher morality of the Constitution. The Constitution gives us, decrees equality, Article 14 that Neera spoke about, and therefore, so the state, I wanted to also underline that the state, in my understanding, is neutral to religion, is only part of the story. The state is neutral, but it's not hands-off religion. I believe that the secular idea places not just the right but the duty of the state to intervene where religious belief contravenes constitutional morality, and that's why untouchability is unconstitutional. That's why women must have equal rights. And on this one point, I do gently disagree with Neera's position. I do feel gender equality, reform of religion for gender equality is part of the duty in my imagination of secularism. There was another question, I think, and when I said our secular idea is really derived from a distillation of what is finest in our philosophical and civilizational traditions. One of these is what Amartya Sen in the Argumentative Indian talks about. He says one of the richest ideas that we have in our philosophical traditions is doubt, is the absence of certainty. And how important, I mean, so I believe in something, but I admit that I could be wrong. And only when I can do that can I respect your way of life and your beliefs as equally legitimate. And I think that is also central. I mean, Amartya Sen quotes the Rig Veda, which is a description, a beautiful description through many, many verses of how the universe was created, something like the book of Genesis. But what is the last verse in the Rig Veda? After you've described all of this, you say, but who knows whether the universe was actually created this way? I don't know. You don't know. Only God knows, but maybe even God doesn't know. And then you leave it at that. And I think that, yes, the secular idea also incorporates the acceptance of the absence of certainty. That there is no final belief that must, superintend, supersede every other, except the beliefs that we have sat together and written into our constitution and into its morality. The notion of Vasudev Kutumbakam, the world is my family, including both not just other humans, however diverse, but also the non-human and, in fact, the non-living world. And with all of these, I've said for me, secularism is the idea of belonging without conditionalities. It is the acceptance collectively of the higher morality of constitutional morality, while I have the freedom to follow my own ways of life. It is the duty of the state to remain neutral between religions, but to intervene where religious belief contravenes uh, constitutional morality. And the last idea that I want to bring in is, for me, for my idea, my understanding of secularism, it is the idea of fraternity, which is written into the Constitution. Dr. Ambedkar actually said, out of the four pillars, this is the most fundamental of all pillars. Fraternity is a problematic word because it means brotherhood. It leaves out sisterhood and other genders. But the Hindi word for in the Constitution for fraternity is a very beautiful one, which is bandhuta. Bandhuta is derived from Sanskrit, which literally means हम एक दूसरे से बंधे हुए हैं. We are bound to and with each other. We might have different languages, religions, ways of life. We might be different in every other way, but yet we are bound to and with each other. And that is what is binding us. We're not together because we are the same. We are bound together because we respect each other's in our different ways of life. There are many sibling ideas of fraternity, like solidarity, like egalitarian compassion. I'd like to say egalitarian compassion. It's not a compassion that you are here and I'm here and I'm giving you compassion, but that we're two human beings meeting each other and you have suffered great pain and I'm there to share it, but tomorrow you can share my pain. It's the idea of caring, and Noam Chomsky actually put it very well. It's just the idea, what is the basis of us living together? What should be the basis? Is the idea that we should take care of each other. I remember when the Food Security Act was being debated, and I was trying to argue for it, and there was so much anger and I couldn't understand. And finally, one person, a rich industrialist, she said, why should I be taxed to feed the poor? And I realized that yes, and the answer is because we must take care of each other. And that is the idea of secular democracy for me at its most. It is the idea of radical love with immense courage, of the kind that Gandhiji showed in the last months of his life when the country had been torn apart, etc. One last. And finally, for me, the idea of secularism and of fraternity, of bandhuta, is the idea that if there are chains on your feet, I feel my freedom has been taken away from me. If somebody is lashing your back, I feel the pain on mine. If your daughter has been gang raped, it is as if my daughter has been gang raped. That it is that idea. When you are in pain, tears well up in my eyes. It is that idea, to my mind, which is at the core of the secular idea of India. Thank you.
Thank you, Harsh. I think he brought to the forefront the important issue that what are the preconditions of a decent society where we relate to each other as fellow citizens. And secularism is one of those preconditions, very closely connected, or rather, we can say fraternity. I'm not so happy with fraternity, it's a gender specific word, but if you were going to think about solidarity, it certainly depends upon secularism. It is, it is a necessary. So thank you for bringing us to the wider implications. Can we either open the doors or have the AC on? Because I think everybody is feeling a little uncomfortable.
I think we should say.
I think it's possible to have the AC on, or will everybody? Right, I leave it to the organizers to
ask them
decide.
to put on the AC.
Manoj, can we hear you next, please? Manoj, one of the MPs we have great hope in. One of the few MPs I can say who take a clear stand on very controversial issues and not rest just keep quiet.
Thank you so much, नीरा जी, जोया जी, अपूर्वा सर, हर्ष भाई. I'm 100% sure you have not come here to get a fresh insight into what we are discussing. I can see the old faces, I can see the young faces. So, ये मायूस लोगों की जमात है. हम सब इस मजलिस में हैं. I'm nothing else to, I mean, theoretically तो मैं इन लोगों को पढ़ता रहा हूँ, खुद भी यूनिवर्सिटी टीचर रहा हूँ, किताबें भी लिखी. Secularism occupied almost central rostrum in what we wrote, what we talked about. But today when we discuss, or whatever I say, I'll be rather melancholic. ये मैं उतना ऑप्टिमिज्म मेरे अंदर नहीं है अब, क्योंकि मैंने दोनों काम करके देख लिया है. मैं यूनिवर्सिटी में भी रहा हूँ और अब मैं पार्लियामेंट में हूँ. मेजॉरिटेरियनिज्म थियोरेटिकली पढ़ना और मेजॉरिटेरियनिज्म को महसूस करना, दैट आई हैव सीन. बट अब इतनी भी मायूसी नहीं करूंगा कि हम अगली बार मिले ही नहीं. आई जस्ट वांटेड टू बिगिन लॉन्ग बैक. अपूर्वा जी को याद होगा, कुछ अरसों के लिए एक पत्रिका आई थी, गंगा. मैं पटना यूनिवर्सिटी का छात्र था. 88 की बात कर रहा हूँ. राम जन्मभूमि बाबरी मस्जिद आंदोलन चल रहा था. आंदोलन भी क्या कहूं, आंदोलन शब्द का तो कबाड़ा हो जाता है अगर मैं ये सब बोलूं. तो कमलेश्वर ने एक चिट्ठी लिखी. कमलेश्वर जी को एक चिट्ठी लिखी गई राही मासूम रजा द्वारा. एंड द लेटर बिगैन लाइक दिस. यार कमलेश्वर, ये मौसम बदलने का नाम क्यों नहीं लेता? अभी हाल में भी मैंने लिखा, उसी को कोट करते हुए हिंदुस्तान में, दैनिक हिंदुस्तान में. You know, when he wrote that letter, जो हमारी आबादी आज है ना, वो तब बड़ी आबादी थी. मायूस लोग बड़ी संख्या में थे और जिन्हें मौसम बदलने से मजा आ रहा था वो छोटी संख्या में थे. आज नंबर गेम पलट गया. They are huge in number. We are getting smaller every day. Not because of their deeds. Some of our deeds are also responsible. I don't hold these people, क्योंकि ये एक सपना लेकर के चल रहे थे, चल रहे हैं अभी भी. वो नाइटमेयर बनता देख रहे हैं, फिर भी चल रहा है. बट व्हाट वरीज मी, एंड आई लोकेट इट. अदीब साहब यहां बैठे हुए हैं. अदीब साहब 19 के चुनाव के पहले या कभी बाद में आपने एक बार एक कैंपेन कहा था कि मुसलमान इस देश में चुनाव में शिरकत करना छोड़ दे. बात है ना सही? मुझे गुस्सा आया था. अदीब साहब, व्हाट काइंड ऑफ कैंपेन आर यू प्लानिंग टू लॉन्च? आज आप पर गुस्सा नहीं आ रहा. आई एम टेलिंग यू दिस. आई कैन सेंस इट. वेयर आर वी हेडिंग? कोर्ट बड़ी बड़ी बातें करते हैं, खास करके हमारे सर्वोच्च न्यायालय के लोग. कमाल का है. टू थिंग्स फॉर द फर्स्ट टाइम इन माई लाइफ आई एम सीइंग दैट देयर इज अ लैंग्वेज यूज्ड इन ऑब्जर्वेशन and there is a language used in the judgment. A huge anomaly. अखबारों में आप हीरो बन गए. कितनी बढ़िया बात कर रही हो होमोसेक्सुअलिटी पे, इस पे, उस पे, कॉन्फ्लिक्ट को लेकर के, राइट को लेकर के, मेजॉरिटेरियन इथॉस को लेकर के. when the judgment comes, you stand with the majoritarian politics. This is something which has destroyed whatever hope we had. हम लोग कहां जाएंगे? पार्लियामेंट नहीं है. There is virtually, I'm telling you as a member, parliament is hollow symbolism, nothing. खैर, कई सारे दोस्त हैं जिनका सबसे ज्यादा फुटप्रिंट है देश में बीजेपी के बाद. सॉफ्ट हिंदुत्व की बात करते हैं. राक्षस का कोई सॉफ्ट वर्जन नहीं होता. Devil has no soft version. A majoritarian ethos which is bent on killing everything, including constitutional values, उसका कोई, मुझको नहीं लगता है कि आप एडोल्फ हिटलर से लड़ते वक्त सॉफ्ट हिटलर कोई पॉलिसी अडॉप्ट कर सकते हैं, क्योंकि सॉफ्ट वर्जन होता ही नहीं है साहब. वो जो पूरा चेहरा है वो जो है हार्ड सॉफ्ट एक ही जैसा है. And I'm saying this, that political parties in opposition are losing the plot. एक बड़ी आबादी को आपने अकेला छोड़ दिया. मतलब आप मेरी बात को, अगर मैं कह रहा हूं पूरे होशो हवास में आपसे ये कह रहा हूं कि अब ये लड़ाई पॉलिटिकल पार्टीज के वश की नहीं है. सॉरी टू से दैट. कभी होगा? आज तो मेरा दिल भी नहीं कर रहा था इस विषय पे आके बोलूं. दिल तब तो करेगा ना जब कोई भरोसा हो. मैं आपके बीच में आकर के आपको कहूं कि अरे बहुत बढ़िया दिन आने वाले हैं 24 में, विल अनसेटल देम एंड विल बी इन दिल्ली, लाल किले पे कोई फलाना साहब झंडा फहराएंगे, और द डैमेज विच हैज बीन डन टू पॉलिटिकल सोशल स्ट्रक्चर, टू द आइडियाज विच मेनी यंग, फकत द ओल्ड अदीब साहब और हम जैसे लोग, मेनी यंग, आपके जो सपने थे, मैं I'm 100% sure it will take at least 5 decades to get back to the position we had, if at all we get back. And the if is both I and F is in capitals. It is in capitals. Now, सेक्युलरिज्म का टेस्ट कहां होता है? क्लासरूम में नहीं होता, एग्जाम में नहीं होता है ना, सेमिनार्स में नहीं होते हैं. Secularism is tested in electoral arena. How many political parties are willing to take secularism as the major plank in their electoral agenda? उन्होंने पहले सेक्युलर को सिक्युलर लिखा. We almost accepted. हम बीमार लोगों की ये विधा थी. Now secularism is equal to appeasement. And नीरज जी, शाहबानों के अलावा, जिसको भी मैं मानता हूं कि एक लिमिटेड स्मॉल एलीट ने उसमें गेम किया, आज तक अपीजमेंट के नाम पर मुझे दूसरा कुछ नहीं मिलता. मैं तो अपने क्लासरूम में कहता था कि अगर मैं किसी छात्र को अपीज करना चाहूं तो क्या करूंगा? बिना आए अटेंडेंस दे दूंगा, बिना परीक्षा दिए नंबर दे दूंगा, बिना असाइनमेंट सबमिट किए हुए ए ग्रेड दे दूंगा. कुछ तो मिला नहीं. अब तो और हाशिए पे है. बिलोंगिंग का जिक्र कर रहे थे हर्ष भाई. एक होती है नेचुरल बिलोंगिंग. आई बिलोंग नेचुरली बिकॉज ऑफ माई नेम एंड डबली बिकॉज ऑफ माई सरनेम. नाम मनोज, सरनेम झा. द सेकेंड पर्सन हैज टू स्ट्रगल एवरी डे 24/7 to tell you, to convince you, to communicate to you, to appeal to you, I too belong. उसे बड़ी परीक्षाएं देनी पड़ती है. Somebody is secular in spite of being Muslim. मुसलमान है लेकिन पक्का देशभक्त है. ये नेचुरलाइज कर लिया है स्टेटमेंट्स हमने. ओटीटी है, फिल्में हैं, सब ये काम कर रही हैं मिलजुल करके साथ साथ. वक्त ज्यादा दे लूंगा, 2 मिनट और. Long back, if I remember correct, I'll not just take 2 more minutes. Long back, I remember, I think 1990s, please correct me. There was this disqualification of Shiv Sena MLAs in Maharashtra on the grounds that they had sought votes in the name of religion. And then comes the wisdom from Supreme Court. Seeking votes in the name of Hinduism is not misuse of religion. Hinduism is a way of life. तो इस्लाम ने कौन सा गुनाह किया? क्रिश्चियनिटी ने कौन सा गुनाह किया? I mean, these kind of judgments, I believe, have provided the foundation of a majoritarian politics which worries us all. और मैं फिर से कहता हूं, ये मजलिस हमारी, ये जमात वरीड लोगों की है, परेशान लोगों की है. एंड फाइनली आई मस्ट से, इतनी सारी बातें मैंने कही, एंड whatever little I said, you would have found that I'm a worried man, I'm a worried citizen, I'm a worried father for my daughters, I'm a worried friend of yours. that I don't see any hope, because all of us expect light in this dark tunnel from political parties. They have lost the source. Thank you so much. Jai Hind.
मनोज ने तो और भी मायूस कर दिया हमको the prospect of any hope in the future has been completely destroyed. Manoj, don't do this to us. We look towards you and other right-minded politicians to lead us out of this quagmire. But that's another story. Apoor, please.
बहुत शुक्रिया हर्ष और सेंटर फॉर इक्विटी स्टडीज़ एक ऐसे लफ्ज़ को याद करने के लिए जिसको सार्वजनिक चर्चा से लगभग बाहर कर दिया गया है और जो अब सिर्फ अकादमिक चर्चा में रह गया है और अकादमिक चर्चा में भी वो बहुत आकर्षक विषय नहीं माना जाता है। खुद वे लोग जिन्होंने कभी यह कहा था कि सेक्युलरिज्म या धर्मनिरपेक्षता, जो नेहरू ने ठीक ही कहा कि एक नाकाफ़ी लफ्ज़ है सेक्युलरिज्म के लिए और पूरे मानी इससे नहीं निकलते सेक्युलरिज्म के। खुद उन्हें जो ये मानते थे कि यह बुनियादी तत्व है हिंदुस्तानी जनतंत्र का, उन्हें अब शक पैदा हो गया है। मैं हाल में राजीव भार्गव का नया मोनोग्राफ पढ़ रहा था जिसमें मुझे यह संदेह दिखलाई पड़ा कि कुछ हम लोगों से गड़बड़ हो गई और उसमें उन्होंने सनातन शब्द प्रस्तावित किया कि हमें इस पर विचार करना चाहिए कि इनसे हमारा इस शब्द से हमारा रिश्ता क्या है। अभी उस पर तफसील से बात करने का मौका नहीं है, लेकिन धर्मनिरपेक्षता इस धारणा को लेकर या इस ख्याल को लेकर शक आज़ादी के 10-15 सालों के बाद खुद बौद्धिक जगत में पैदा होने लगा था। अगर मैं हिंदी की बात करूं, मैं हिंदी साहित्य का पाठक हूं, विद्यार्थी हूं, तो हम निर्मल वर्मा जैसे लोगों को पढ़ते हैं जिन्होंने पहली बार ये कहना शुरू किया कि धर्मनिरपेक्षता ने हिंदुस्तानी चेतना में एक फांक पैदा कर दी है, भारतीय चेतना में, और उस फांक से ही सारी विकृतियां या डिस्टॉर्शंस पैदा हो रहे हैं। इस बात को और लोगों ने भी आगे बढ़ाया। मैं फिर थोड़ा सरलीकरण कर रहा हूं, लेकिन आप आशीष नंदी के सिद्धांतीकरण को देख सकते हैं जिससे हमारे भीतर धर्मनिरपेक्षता के विचार को लेकर एक संदेह पैदा होने लगा कि क्या धर्मनिरपेक्षता एक तरह का विदेशी विचार है जिसको भारत में आरोपित किया जा रहा है, और विदेशी और देशी के बीच का अंतर, जो अंतर उस अंतर को इतना ज़्यादा सामने करना और उसे एक तरह का पाप बतलाना, यानी एक विदेशी अवधारणा को लाकर देसी ज़मीन में रोकने की कोशिश ही एक तरह का पाप थी यह। और दूसरे के हिंदुस्तान की मुश्किलों को नहीं समझना। इस मुश्किल को नेहरू ने समझा था। मैं R.K. करंजिया और नेहरू के इंटरव्यूज़ को पढ़ रहा था, बहुत पहले पढ़ा, दोबारा तिबारा, जो 2 जिल्दों में छपे हुए हैं। एक है द माइंड ऑफ मिस्टर नेहरू और दूसरा है द फिलॉसफी ऑफ मिस्टर नेहरू। ये 1958-59 से लेकर 63 तक नेहरू से जो करंजिया ने अलग अलग वक्त बात की उसका संग्रह है, उसके 2 संग्रह हैं छोटे छोटे। उसमें करंजिया ने नेहरू से पूछा कि आप अगर अपनी उपलब्धि हासिल कहना चाहेंगे तो वो हासिल क्या है, और नेहरू ने कहा कि मैं इस बात को लेकर मुझे थोड़ी सी तसल्ली होती है कि हमने 1947 में एक बहुत ही तूफानी समंदर में यह जहाज था और हमने थोड़ा सा उसको स्थिर किया है थोड़ा। तो नेहरू ने काफ़ी विनम्रता के साथ 1947 के 10 साल 12 साल गुजर जाने के बाद यह कहा कि इतनी भर तसल्ली है कि वी हैव सक्सीड इन स्टीयरिंग द शिप, जो उस टर्बुलेंट वाटर में था उसको हमने थोड़ा स्थिर कर दिया है। वो टर्बुलेंट वाटर क्या था और उसमें हमारे पास उस टर्बुलेंस को रोकने के औजार क्या थे और हमारे पास साधन क्या थे। मुझे ऐसा मालूम होता है कि हमने थोड़े वक्त के बाद इस मुश्किल को किनारे कर दिया और हमें यह लगा कि यह शायद अब मुख्य बात नहीं है, और वो मुख्य बात थी हिंदुओं और मुसलमानों या का जो नया भारत है उसके साथ क्या रिश्ता होगा। एक और इस बात को भूल कर, और मैं इसको एक दूसरे ढंग से कहना चाहूंगा, यहाँ राजनीति शास्त्री बैठी हुई हैं दो, वे कैसे कहेंगी, लेकिन दो परेशानियां थी हिंदुस्तान में। एक सेक्युलर प्रिंसिपल था और दूसरा एक डेमोक्रेटिक प्रिंसिपल था। और मैं फिर सिंप्लीफाई कर रहा हूँ, सरलीकरण कर रहा हूँ, लेकिन डेमोक्रेटिक एंजाइटीज हमारी इतना हावी हो गई कि हमने फिर सेक्युलरिज्म के साथ समझौता करना तय कर लिया। यह बात 60 के दशक से शुरू हुई, जिस वक्त लोहिया ने यह कहा कि वो शैतान से भी हाथ मिला लेंगे, और उन्होंने शैतान से हाथ मिलाया। और उसके कुछ दिन बाद जयप्रकाश नारायण के लिए जनतंत्र इतना महत्वपूर्ण हो गया कि सरकार को बदलना, और उसमें मैं बहुत साफ कहूँगा, उसमें झूठ का सहारा लेना। यानी जयप्रकाश नारायण ने पहली बार झूठ का सहारा लिया था। मुझे अभी तक याद है कि बिहार में अब्दुल गफूर की सरकार थी, अदीब साहब को ज्यादा याद होगा। अब्दुल गफूर वाहिद मुसलमान चीफ मिनिस्टर थे उस वक्त, और मैं बिहार का हूँ, सिवान का हूँ, जहाँ के अब्दुल गफूर थे। उनकी शोहरत एक निहायत ही ईमानदार राजनेता की थी, लेकिन जयप्रकाश नारायण ने अब्दुल गफूर की सरकार का इस्तीफा देने की जिद पकड़ ली, और नारा भ्रष्टाचार का था। इससे बड़ा झूठ कुछ हो नहीं सकता था। उस वक्त बिहार में जयप्रकाश आंदोलन में जो नारे लगते थे उनमें एक प्रमुख नारा था, वह था गाय हमारी माता है, अब्दुल गफूर उसको खाता है। यह प्रमुख नारा था। जयप्रकाश नारायण के पास ये नारा लेकर उनके साथी गए, और जयप्रकाश नारायण ने कहा कि यह बहुत महत्वपूर्ण नहीं, क्योंकि जनतांत्रिक परिवर्तन करना बहुत महत्वपूर्ण था। और यह समझौता जो जेपी ने किया, इसकी कीमत हम सारे लोग आज चुका रहे हैं। यही बात मैं विश्वनाथ प्रताप सिंह के बारे में भी कहना चाहूंगा, जिन्होंने फिर झूठ का सहारा लिया, और वो बोफोर्स का झूठ था। और उसके बाद 2010-11 में फिर एक बड़े झूठ का सहारा लिया गया, और इस तरह हमने जनतांत्रिक अपनी आकांक्षाओं को पूरा किया, क्योंकि जनतंत्र में परिवर्तन बहुत ही आवश्यक है। मैं फिर सिंप्लीफाई कर रहा हूं, जैसा मैंने कहा, और हमने कहा कि सेक्युलरिज्म कैन वेट। ये जो एंजाइटी है ये इंतजार कर सकती है। तो ये इसकी वजह से चूंकि हमने और दूसरी चीज कि उसमें हमें इससे कोई परहेज नहीं था कि आप मेजॉरिटी कैसे बनाते हैं। जयप्रकाश नारायण को भी इससे परहेज नहीं था कि आप मेजॉरिटी कैसे बनाते हैं। मेजॉरिटी दो तरह से बनाई जा सकती है, एक जिसमें आप मेजॉरिटेरियन स्लोगन्स का सहारा लेकर मेजॉरिटी बनाएं, अगर वो ज्यादा सुविधाजनक है तो आप उसका इस्तेमाल कर लें। इसलिए जयप्रकाश नारायण को अब्दुल गफूर गाय खाता है के नारे से कोई परहेज नहीं था, क्योंकि उससे ज्यादा जनता के जुटने की सुविधा थी। और वही चीज बाद के दिनों में थी, जिसमें आप ज्यादा जनता किससे जुटा सकते हैं। तो जनतंत्र में मेजॉरिटी का फॉर्मेशन जरूरी है, लेकिन मेजॉरिटी अगर मेजॉरिटेरियन मेजॉरिटी हो तो उसको डिसलॉज करना बहुत ही मुश्किल है, असंभव हो जाता है। एक बार आपने ये रास्ता अपना लिया कि हम मेजॉरिटेरियन मेजॉरिटी फॉर्म करेंगे और इसका ये तरीका है, तो शायद ही आप उसको डिसलॉज कर सकते हैं। और यह नुस्खा भारतीय जनता पार्टी के पास है, लेकिन जैसा मैंने कहा कि इस नुस्खे का इस्तेमाल समाजवादियों ने सबसे ज़्यादा किया और गांधीवादियों ने किया। जयप्रकाश नारायण सबसे बड़े गांधीवादी माने जाते हैं, जिन्होंने सामाजिक परिवर्तन का नारा दिया। उन्होंने कहा कि मुसलमानों की फिक्र इंतजार कर सकती है, हम बाकी सबका समाधान अभी कर लेंगे। तो जो फिक्र नेहरू की थी कि हमने इस जहाज को थोड़ा स्थिर कर लिया है, बाद में लोगों ने ये नहीं देखा कि उनके पास पूरे साधन नहीं थे। 1961 जबलपुर, अगर उसको मैं एक मेजर पॉइंट मानूं, जबलपुर की हिंसा, उसके बाद से लगातार होने वाली हिंसाएं और उसमें हमारी असमर्थता, उसके बावजूद जब हमने ये फैसला किया ये हमारे लिए सेंट्रल कंसर्न नहीं है, तो हमें इस जगह पहुंचना ही था जहां हम पहुंच गए। और आखिरी बात ये कि हर्ष ने जो कहा और उस पर प्रोफेसर नीरा चंदोक ने कहा कि हर्ष ने जो शर्तें रखी हैं वो डिसेंट सोसाइटी बनने की शर्त है। लेकिन अगर आप इजराइल को अभी देख लें और हिंदुस्तान को देख लें, तो अगर कोई ये समाज तय कर ले कि मुझे डिसेंट नहीं बनना है, मैं डिसेंट नहीं बनना चाहता हूं, और तुम कितना भी मुझे बताओ कि डिसेंसी यहां है, मैं इसको कबूल नहीं करता हूं, फिर आप उस समाज को कैसे बदलेंगे? ये इजरायली समाज के साथ है, तो गिडियन लेवी हों या आमिरा हास हों या इलान पैपे हों या दूसरे तमाम लोग हों, वे लगातार इजरायली समाज को कह रहे हैं कि यू आर टर्निंग इनटू एन इनडिसेंट, ब्रूटल, क्रूअल सोसाइटी। इजरायली सोसाइटी को इसकी कोई फिक्र नहीं है। उसी तरह शायद अब हम ज्यादातर हिंदुओं को यह कह रहे हैं कि आप डिसेंसी छोड़ रहे हैं, लेकिन हमें जो जवाब मिलता है वो ये कि इसकी हमें फिक्र नहीं है।
Before we open it up to the audience and ask for their comment, informed comment, I just want to make 2 points. You know, we have heard the politics of despair. We have heard actual political practice departs from normative political theory. But I want to say one thing, you know, that there is always a third option. The imagination of a society is to tap that third option. और आपको मैं 2 उदाहरण दूंगी. Political theory has always been concerned since Plato about the perfectly just society. From Plato to John Rawls, perfectly just society. Now in the 1990s, an Israeli professor called Avishai Margalit, I had the pleasure of meeting him in Patna actually, wrote a book called The Decent Society. He said, forget about the just society. Let us think of a society where people do not kill each other for religion. लोगों को मारना है. So let us think of a minimalist system, a decent society where people do not humiliate each other, because humiliation carries scars. It's like rape. It carries scars, probably bodily scars, but also mental scars. And that made a great impact, at least upon me, because I felt that is precisely our issue. और मुझे एक छोटा सा उदाहरण याद आया. I have to confess, I'm a film fan, I'm a film buff. And one of the finest movies I have seen, which we cannot screen in India of today, is Garam Hawa, MS Satyu. If you remember, Balraj Sahni had to leave Agra because things had become impossible. His family had left, and he said at one point, "Aadmi akela kab tak jiye." So he locks the door of his haveli and he gets into a tonga. With great despair, he did not want to go to a country where Islam had become the official religion. But India had become communal as well. His son had joined the Communist Party. So he tells the Tongawala station, the Tongawala said, Musulman ho, this is not double price. Zoya, take me to the railway. He sees a procession. The procession, small procession, carrying a flag with a sickle and a hammer. CPI. He stops the tonga, gets off, straightens his cap and joins the profession. There is a third way to politicization Hinduism and politicization Islam. That way, I think the Constitution showed us, because the Constitution was created in the middle of destroyed homes and destroyed places of worship. You know, you created a Constitution, and the threats of doing away with this Constitution fill me with dread, because it was the outcome of a mass struggle. Or war mass struggle, because we grew up in the shadow of the freedom struggle. We were all post-independence generations. Now, in a way, we grew up, and Constitution वहाँ थी, maybe we took it for granted. तो कहीं पर we have to find a third way. So Manoj, it is for you guys to find us a third way. We can only give our utopias. And utopia is not without flaws. I mean, Thomas More, the great thinker, wrote a book called Utopia, in which he made, equality of land, labor. Nobody should exploit anybody, do away with noblemen. But he also said women should fall at the feet of their husbands every year and beg pardon for their dereliction of domestic duty. This is also utopia. So utopia में लोग आप electoral politics में third लाइए option to caste and religion. Identity politics से दूर हट करके एक ऐसा सुनहरा दिखाइए ख्वाब कि देखिए it is possible to build a society on mutual respect. And I'm sorry, you will have to, the right can only be beaten by a project aligned to the left. History this has been shown. Left की आप ideology or ideological vocabulary भूल जाइए. That is the biggest bar. But think of a society of egalitarianism, redistributive justice, a society of respect, a society where there is the notion of freedom. कहीं पर तो एक vision हमें मिले. We are only seeing the opposition of religion to the opposite, is caste. अब दोनों ही identity formation है, and frankly these are very divisive agendas. Though I am the first one to agree that caste is a very crucial issue, but we should not make it an election. I'll stop here. Please, questions. Introduce yourself and please short.
Good evening, ma'am and sir, and thank you so much for this wonderful discussion. I have two very short questions. पहला क्वेश्चन मैम, जैसे अभी हमने इसमें बात किया ज़्यादातर प्रेस्क्रिप्टिव वे में कि इनफैक्ट हमारे इंस्टीट्यूशन में भी सेक्युलरिज्म उतना नहीं है, या डिसेंट सोसाइटी की बात हुई, तो उसका हम प्रेस्क्रिप्शन हम क्या कह सकते हैं कि क्या वी कैन डू टू ब्रिंग इट ऑन ट्रैक. एंड सेकेंडली, जैसे सर ने बात किया कि देयर वर 4 पिलर्स ऑफ इंस्टीट्यूशन, उसमें फ्रेटर्निटी थी, तो कुछ समय पहले हम कन्वर्सेशन कर रहे थे तो इसमें आया कि 3 पिलर को तो फिर भी हम लोगों ने इंस्टीट्यूशनलाइज किया है. इज देयर एनी वे दैट वी कैन इंस्टीट्यूशनलाइज इवन दिस फ्रेटर्निटी पिलर विच इज वेरी इंपॉर्टेंट. थैंक यू सो मच.
We'll take 4 questions, please. Quick and sharp, please. I'm sorry, but no alternative.
मनोज भाई से सवाल यह है कि जिस आंदोलनों से निकल के आए हैं, शायद वो भरोसा शायद टूट रहा है, शायद ये उनकी जो पीड़ा है वो समझ रहे हैं. लेकिन दिक्कत यह है कि समाज में अभी जितना दिखाने की कोशिश हो रही है, पार्लियामेंट में दिख सकता है या इंस्टीट्यूशनलाइज्ड वे में दिख सकता है, लेकिन समाज अभी उतना नहीं बटा है. और अभी भी चुनाव के दौर में भी जो वोट परसेंटेज हैं, तो जो विपक्ष है उसको भी बहुत बड़ी मिली है, मतलब सीट के रूप में कन्वर्ट हो पाए नहीं हो पाए. तो हम कह रहे हैं कि इतना निराश होने की क्या वजह है मनोज जी को, मैं थोड़ा ये जानना चाह रहा हूँ.
There was a hand, yes, please.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Anshuman. I had a talk with a retired ICMR director and a very renowned economist. He told me कि अगर 24 में बीजेपी जीत जाए तो अपने वोटर आईडी कार्ड पे आग लगा देना, 29 में हिंदुस्तान में इलेक्शंस नहीं होंगे. काफी दुख हुआ था ये सुनकर, बट लर्नड फैक्ट्स की काफी.
Hello, hi. I am Sakira, and since it's a panel composed of both theorists and politicians, I have this question. हम लोग कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन पे बहुत डिबेट कर रहे थे, and you guys do believe in the spirit of the constitution. So do I. But one argument that I have often come against in various theories and pages is that the Constituent Assembly was diverse but was not an elected body. So why should you place a constitution that was made 70 years ago, although I genuinely believe in it, why should you place it, above an elected body? I know the risks of majoritarianism, but that's a compromise we make for democracy. So why do you place it above elected bodies? And how do we deal with this question in today's atmosphere? Because it's a very valid question. I know it's really important to preserve the constitution, but at the same time, we need very legitimate answers to this question to make our point.
Yes, there's a question there.
Good evening, ma'am. My name is Gautam. I am working for a member of parliament in Rajya Sabha. I am fellow. And first, I have one question and one request. My first question is that recent days I am seeing an intersectionality between political ideology and economic ideology. For example, if you are following Hindutva, you should be far right, and if you belong to a minority community, you are leftists or middle left. And my request is, since I am from Tamil Nadu, I cannot understand Hindi, and when we are speaking about some issues of national importance, I think English can be used, so we cannot feel excluded.
Would you like to comment?
Just to go back to the title, Secularism in the Indian Constitution, we are used to looking at it in terms of the four articles on freedom of religion, starting with Article 25, which, as Harsh mentioned, involves the right to legislate on financial and secular matters connected with religious practice, right? I mean, so temple entry and so on, you can't have legislation by the elected legislature. So you can't rule it out on the grounds of freedom of religion. You can't say that I believe in the caste system and so on. And I believe in excluding Dalits from temples. So you can't. That is one aspect of it, an empowering aspect. There's another one, Article 29, which is more problematic, which is about propagation is the problematic phrase there. Subject to a public order kind of exception, right? The right to...
25, not 25.
25 is... No, 25 is the...
25 is freedom of religion.
Yeah, the propagation and propagation.
Subject to
29. Anyway, that's immaterial. Now that is also there in the Constitution, subject to a public order exception, right? Now, I'm wondering if there is a concept of Sarva Dharma Samabhava, which, equality of all religions in the public sphere, has a natural tendency to slip into majoritarianism. And, in a context of electoral competition, right? And in that situation, if our recognition of the public order exception becomes, in a sense, warped. Now, for instance, Muslim communal issues, when it's agitated on the streets, like, for instance, the citizenship amendment bill, they come out in the streets and protest it. It becomes a visible example of public disorder, right? Which kind of enables a very harsh.
Could we have them respond to some question?
Which has a very harsh, repressive response from the state, and a majoritarian assertion of, say, for instance, Ram Janmabhoomi thing, is not recognized as public disorder, right? So that's why comment. And sorry to the back bench.
Thank you. I'll take the last question first about Constituent Assembly. I'll just tell you one thing. While presenting the objective resolution, why I agree that if the scheme of things could have been an elected body would have made, but that was, look at the transfer of power and transition, many things were there. While presenting the objective resolution, Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru said something referred to French Revolution, oath of tennis court. It so happened that the king initially was willing that they will make a very good constitution. In France, when the king started getting news that the constitution is getting so powerful that it might clip my powers, so he closed all the rooms in that building. So the assembly moved to tennis court, and from there they took an oath That is called oath of tennis court, will protect it. Nehru used that, and that's the defense I tell you about Constituent Assembly. Number one. Number two, Neera ji, you said about garam hawa. I very strongly feel, मैंने बहुत मायूस किया था, लेकिन मेरा मानना, हिम्मत भाई आपके सवाल का जवाब मिलेगा. I'm sorry, friend from Tamil Nadu. Sorry, Parliament ने मुझे खराब कर दिया है. So it so happened, I believe that anybody who does politics from heart has to be leftist because heart is of the left. Need not be CPI, CPM, CPI, वगैरह वगैरह. That's what I feel. But the fact is, politics through heart is almost museumized now. Number one. Number two, fraternity. There was a question on institutionalization. I just wish to convey to you that today, while the other member from BJP had a divisive agenda in the private members bill, I have submitted a bill to institutionalize fraternity today itself. So let's hope someday some अच्छे दिन someday comes and we vote share. You know, I find it very bizarre. We look at vote share when it suits us. We have lost an election. And my idea was conveying here that we did not fight this election. We, when I say we, all of us, on conveying or communicating the important constitutional values. We almost played on their turf. They had 3 Babas, we had 2 Babas. I mean, I have seen those visuals that the person who was likely to be the chief minister, he was almost floating in the feet of that Baba, who does not even remotely appear to me as a Baba. Whatever little we know the Babas of like Kabir and all. And finally, don't burn your voting card. 24 shall come, win, we, fine, but you have to do repair work of this country. And that is not only, that is not confined only to election. Begin repair work, and I think that's all, ma'am, I could say.
Just 2 quick responses. One to the young lady there about the Constituent Assembly. You're quite right, it was unelected, but please do not forget that the Constituent Assembly, unelected though it was, emerged from the national movement. And the Constituent Assembly reflected the ideas of the national movement. And we should not forget that the anti-colonial nationalist movement was one of the biggest mass movements in history. It's only comparable to 1 or 2 other such movements. And I think some of the ideas of the Constituent Assembly have been discussed from 1926, from the Karachi Congress in 1926. So in a way, the Constituent Assembly and the Constitution was a culmination of those ideas. So for us to say that it was unelected is formally right, but substantively not so. Secondly, I noticed that there's so much pessimism here, and there's so much everyone is disheartened. But I think the issue really is the politicization of religion. The issue is not Hinduism, Hindus, or any religion. I take heart from the fact, a point that was made by the gentleman there, that the very large numbers of people in India are still voting for non-BJP parties. BJP support is focused in the Hindi heartland. It does not have the same support in many parts of the country. If we had proportional representation, which most democracies have, we are quite exceptional among the few countries which has a first past the post system. Now, if we had PR or some variation of PR, I think we would have a very different political scenario. So I think, in short, what I'm saying is majoritarianism is not permanent. It is a political phenomenon, and it can change as long as we have democracy, even if it is and electoral democracy such as we have today, it can change. क्योंकि हमारे यहाँ जो तब्दीली हुई है पिछले 15-20 साल में या हाँ चलिए पिछले 15-20 साल में, वो तब्दीली जो है वो मजहबी सियासत की वजह से हुई। वो मुझे नहीं लगता है कि हमारे मुल्क में कोई ऐसा सोशल रेवोल्यूशन हुआ है जिसकी वजह से हुआ। नो, ये ज़रूर है कि एक बहुत बड़ा मूवमेंट हुआ, राम जन्मभूमि अयोध्या मूवमेंट, मगर अगर आप उसको अलग कर दें तो उसके अलावा कोई ऐसी बड़ा आंदोलन नहीं हुआ है। तो मेरे ख्याल में ये सारा खेल जो है वो पॉलिटिक्स का है, और जब तक हमारे यहाँ इलेक्टोरल पॉलिटिक्स है ये खेल बदल सकता है, और उम्मीद ये है कि अगर 2024 में नहीं तो 2029 में तो शायद बदले ही जाए।
Politics also. Harsh, would you like?
I mean, I see the hall is emptying out, and so there were many things I would want to respond to. But there was one thing that my fellow panelists said, which I wanted to underline, and that is how the withdrawal of Muslims from public life. And Aqib Saab has gone. I responded very passionately when he recommended the withdrawal of Muslims from public life for their own protection. And just 2 days ago, there was somebody I won't mention who was actually telling me that, I was saying, why did you not fight these elections, ideologically? Because it is an ideological battle.
Yeah.
And you were fighting using their instruments in some kind of way, and you were only strengthening them. And he was saying, you don't understand this ideology, this is not a time for ideology, etc. And he said, most of all, you should listen to Muslims. And he said, Muslim leaders tell me, protect us by invisibilizing us. And I was saying that if you are hearing this discourse, that a Muslim feels safe in politics today, he's saying, save us by abandoning us, then, is that something that we should then feel satisfied with and go along with? It is true that every secular party today is hesitating to put up Muslim candidates, to speak on the question of persecution of Muslims. That is our collective failure, and that is not the path to go along. And I think that unless we have a very strong, emphatic, from the front discussion on secularism and the constitution, and equal rights of Muslims to participate in this country, we are doomed to lose the electoral battle. So linked to this is basically the question of fraternity, and वो मुझे कई बार हर जगह पूछा जाता है कि आप fraternity की बात करते हैं, fraternity मतलब आएगी कहाँ से? And बहुत मुश्किल सवाल है. हम लोग fraternity is one of the least understood and even less practiced principles of democracy, but it is the heart of democracy. And somebody just said, there's something that Dr. Ambedkar said about fraternity which was very interesting. He said justice, liberty, equality can exist in a society, in a country without fraternity. But for that you will need the force of the state behind you. But if there is fraternity in society, justice, liberty, equality become the natural order of things. And therefore, the highest principle of our constitution is fraternity. And we just have to find a way. And मुझे ये लगता है कि political parties नहीं इसके लिए लड़ेंगे, नहीं लड़ रहे हैं, courts इसको uphold नहीं कर रहे हैं. And this is something that I was pulled up in front of the Supreme Court for contempt. And I say it again, that this is a battle that ultimately has to be found by we the people who gave ourselves the constitution, made certain promises, and we have to fight on the streets with non-violence and with love. And most of all, it has to be fought in our hearts. There's partitions of our heart, etc. It sounds to me, it sounds like an idea that is impossible to accomplish, but I don't see any other way. It will take a generation. We've lost our way because all of us have failed to uphold fraternity in public life, not just the political parties, but in the way that we have engaged with public life in multiple ways. We have to remedy it. Society, the political parties will follow us. It is we, the people of India, will have to, in everyday life, every day, fight and battle the partitions that have grown of hate around us. And it will take, generation take 50 years, but there is no other way.
Thank you. You know what we should do is to allow 2 or 3 more comments from the audience, and you don't have to reply.
Yeah.
Yes, young man, I wanted to hear it.
Thank you so much. It was a treat to be a part of this conversation. So many reflections and provocations. I have a few points to make to Professor Chandhoke's provocation. One of which was that if we take the phrase Sadharm Sambhava and that it has some sort of, it has origins in sort of Hindu religion or Hindu culture, how Professor Bhikkhu Parekh had sort of made the point that why should we, and it makes me think that, I mean, if if we can't find some supporting phrases or some supporting ideas in the Hindu culture to sort of support sort of secularism, is that not a problem? I mean, should we not find it also? I mean, we should find it in all the cultures, maybe all the religions. But is that a problem that is that merely a problem? Is that a problem that its origin is Hindu, right? So that's a thought. The other thought is you also
I get the point. Legitimized the notion of secularism, even if we have to. That's fine. You have a strong notion of tolerance in Hinduism. The fact that sort of Dharam Sambhav, there is a strong notion. It used to be, now no longer.
And it is we cannot colonize it just as a Hindu idea. I mean,
Yeah, I get the point. Yeah.
The other point was, I think, which was also I sense some difference on the panel on that question, on the question of whether gender justice is the job of secularism or equality within a community is the job of secularism, or should we think of secularism only as equality between communities when it comes from the state? And I think on the question of Shah Bano, the question of equality is not so much the question of gender justice. The question of equality is, do you let this question of gender justice be equally determined by the Supreme Court or not? So does everyone have equal access to the Supreme Court on this question? Right? Not so much whether you are actually making people equal or not, right? Or why make the exception, right? And I think the third sort of point, which I think is, secularism is a constitutional value, and many people misunderstand its relationship with equality, liberty, dignity, right? And some people even think that secularism is some kind of an additional sort of grant, prasad that has been given to us that we could do without. It's a gift of benevolence that has come from somewhere. And many of these constitutional values have a lot of confusions. I mean, equality has gone through a lot of confusion, liberty has gone through a lot of confusion, justice is going through a perpetual confusion, dignity as well. And there's so many paths to these constitutional values, whether it is positive freedom, whether it is negative freedom, what would be the role of a state in trying to help a minority religion, a minority within a minority, and so on. So I think so many paths, we agree on the value, we agree on the desire to have the value, but we disagree on so many paths that what we face today is actually a product of our collective sort of confusion on so many of these questions, a confusion which has been perpetuated, I would say amplified by the misunderstandings of the Supreme Court.
Live and work with people in Jharkhand and what I feel, the issue of decency or fraternity, I think those are the most important issues. But where did I get those feelings from or emotions from? I learned them from study of religions in childhood, and then in adulthood also I studied religions in great depth. Now it's fashionable not to talk about religion. And the gentleman here was saying if something is good in Hinduism or Islam or whichever religion. My father was a Jain. There's so much in Jainism to learn from. So since we don't do that, then there is something else we could do as children. Gandhiji spoke about Nai Talim, Maulana Azad, Zakir Hussain. All of these people laid a lot of importance on education. I feel that we talk about academic theories at the level of the university or higher education,
but we are not speaking about what we do with children's education. And I think that's where it all begins. So if we were to actually take that up seriously, maybe some change will occur, maybe sooner than later. So I'd like to maybe have another session, we're having many sessions on morality, secularism, the constitution, maybe something about education of children and the constitution, or morality or secularism, whatever. Thank you.
Thank you, this gentleman. Yeah.
I'm from Kerala, Jacob John. I would agree to her saying that religion is not the only criterion as to judge education and so many other things come play a part a lot. That's all I wanted to say.
Right. Thank you. I just wanted to make one small point. You know, the issue of the Constituent Assembly, from the very beginning, the leaders of the national movement were very clear on two things. One, we will write our own constitution, and B, that we will have a Constituent Assembly elected on universal adult franchise from the very beginning, 1925 onwards. Now you look at it, Sri Lanka and Malaysia did not have constituent assemblies. Their constitutions were written by Ivor Jennings. The four African countries, Tanzania, Kenya, Nigeria and Ghana, had to get their constitutions approved by the British Crown before they could declare independence. India was the only country that was allowed. Now in 1945, when the Cabinet mission came, Nehru said we wanted elected Constituent Assembly on the basis of universal adult franchise, and the response was that you have to wait for 3 years because the rolls had to be made. And they couldn't afford to wait because actually partition was around the corner. So Granville Austin has written in his Indian Constitution, and was an authority. He said the Constituent Assembly functioned, it was responsive to every section of opinion. You look at the leaders of the Constituent Assembly, they got Ambedkar, for instance, to be a part of the Constituent Assembly. They got the finest lawyers from across the world to be a part. So in a way it functioned in a spirit of accommodation. It could not be universal, and that based upon universal adult franchise, and Nehru acknowledged it. This is not the Constituent Assembly we wanted. But they had no option. Things had hotted up to such an extent. When we were young, I think I speak for both Zoya and I, we thought of the Constitution as a bourgeois document along with the left. And now we've come to realize that actually it is a bulwark against totalitarianism. And we have to value it. I mean, it has come to dawn on us that we have one of the finest constitutions in the world, though it has been amended out of shape probably now. And I'm actually apprehensive that if the constitution is changed, we will go towards the Hindu Rashtra very soon, and that's not to the taste of many of us. So in a way, these are important issues, but we have to see every issue has to be contextualized. You can't just kind of, for example, it was a colonial constitution. The British did not recognize rights for Indians till 1945, 46. They did not recognize, they only recognized they set up an advisory committee for fundamental rights. They didn't recognize Indians should have that. The rights are core aspect of our constitution, the rights chapter. So in a way, the preamble was written by the national leader. The directive principles of state policy admittedly were borrowed, but Ambedkar said, what is wrong with borrowing? We've come late to the state, so we have to borrow. So these questions are important, but they need to be historical.
One clarification, if you don't mind. I came in very late. This Constituent Assembly, you can't call it unelected. After all, Ambedkar, who was a member from Bengal, and East Bengal went to Pakistan. So he had to be elected, so he was brought in from Bombay, kind courtesy Congress. So this Constituent Assembly, it was not elected on universal adult franchise, which we gave to ourselves when the Constitution came in. But you can't call the Constituent Assembly members unelected.
No, she didn't say elected.
They were
narrow election, narrow base.
No, it was a narrow base, but it was an elected assembly. It
Nobody is disputing
Yeah,
that.
that's
We're also
right.
not disputing that these people got the best brain from across the country to help them draft. Once beer, Ramsey, all of them. You know, so you have to kind of look at the context. Thank you very much. This has been a very exhilarating, and I love the questions.